I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are building a business.
Okay.
Let's say you acquire this massive piece of land at top dollar. You take out hundreds of millions in loans, assuming interest rates will, stay near zero forever.
Right, which is a big assumption.
Exactly. You put absolutely everything on the line to build a product that you are convinced will sell for a premium. But then the market turns.
Yeah, interest rates spike.
Right. Your product isn't selling. The debt payments are piling up to the tune of like thousands of dollars a day.
Right.
And just when it looks like you're going to be completely wiped out by your own miscalculations, the government steps in with a multi-billion-dollar safety net to catch you.
It's quite the scenario.
So here is the question you really have to ask yourself as we get into this today. Would you call that a brilliant, necessary rescue of the broader economy? Or would you call that a fundamentally unfair bailout of wealthy risk takers?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it is the ultimate economic Rorschach test, right? Depending on whether you're holding the mortgage on one of those developments or, whether you're just a regular taxpayer trying to buy groceries, you're going to see two completely different realities.
Welcome to this deep dive where we're going to explore exactly that scenario. And it isn't a hypothetical, right? It's playing out right now.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at a highly controversial $5 billion infrastructure and housing partnership in British Columbia. This was just announced on June 18th, 2026 by Prime Minister Mark Carney and BC Premier David Eby.
And, the sheer scale of this intervention is something we rarely see outside of a major financial crisis.
Yeah.
It's really designed to completely rewire the mechanics of how housing is built and, honestly, more importantly, how it's rescued in one of the most expensive real estate markets on the planet.
Right. So to figure out what is actually happening behind the press conferences, we have pulled from a massive stack of sources for you.
We really went into the weeds on this one.
We did. We are looking at the official government releases, sure, but we're crossing those with deep dive financial analyses, op-eds from housing advocates, and some really hard-hitting local reporting.
Yep.
The mission of this deep dive is to basically understand the actual mechanics of this massive government intervention. We want to explore why it's drawing such fierce, immediate criticism from, across the entire political spectrum and figure out what it actually means for the future of the cities you live in.
But before we get into the weeds, we really do need to be very clear with you about the nature of our sources today.
Yeah, this is important.
The materials we're reviewing contain some highly politically charged commentary. I mean, we have statements from left-wing politicians, figures from the governing Liberal and NDP parties, as well as right-wing figures like Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and BC Conservative housing critic Linda Hepner.
Right. So we need to explicitly state to you, the listener,
Yeah.
We are not taking any sides here.
Definitely not.
Nor are we endorsing the viewpoints of any political figure or party mentioned today. Our goal is simply to impartially report on the ideas, the math, and the arguments contained in the original source material. We just want you to understand the full picture so you can make up your own mind.
Exactly. We're stripping away the rhetoric to look at the actual market dynamics. And I think the best place to start is the blueprint of the money itself.
Let's do it.
So the core of this announcement is a 10-year, $5 billion package. A massive chunk of that, about $3.2 billion, is allocated to cut something called development cost charges, or DCCs, by up to 50%.
Okay, let's unpack development cost charges because, that sounds like boring bureaucratic jargon.
It really does.
But it's actually the hidden price tag of every new neighborhood, right?
Right.
When a builder puts up a 50-story condo tower, those thousands of new residents need water systems, they need new sewer lines, upgraded local roads, parks, all of it. And municipalities charge the developer a fee to build that infrastructure.
Yeah, and by the government's math, stepping in and using taxpayer money to cover those municipal infrastructure costs could save builders up to $40,000 per individual unit in priority communities.
Wow. 40 grand a unit.
Yeah, that is a massive reduction in the upfront cash required to just get a shovel in the ground. And, the package also includes broader public funds.
Right, like the transit stuff.
Exactly. About $2.5 billion for transit, specifically pushing the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain extension forward, plus money for healthcare infrastructure.
Yeah, I saw there are even specific community projects earmarked, like $100 million to build a new school and renovate a health center in Tumbler Ridge.
Right. And on paper, that all sounds like standard heavy-duty government infrastructure spending, you know?
Sure, building trains and schools is what governments do.
Yeah.
But nobody in the financial sector is writing furious op-eds about a new health center in Tumbler Ridge.
No, definitely not.
The absolute catalyst for all the controversy we're seeing this week is a totally different provision. It's called the Canada-British Columbia Partnership on Condo Conversion.
That's the one.
The plan states that Build Canada Homes and BC Housing will use, quote, innovative financing tools to convert over 2,200 vacant, unsold market condos into affordable housing.
Which is wild. We are talking about thousands of completed luxury units sitting completely empty that the state is essentially going to absorb from the private market.
Okay, let's unpack this right here. Turning luxury million-dollar unsold condos into quote-unquote affordable housing sounds a bit like, I don't know, a city buying a fleet of unsold sports cars and trying to repurpose them as public buses.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, how does the math on that actually work without someone taking a massive financial hit?
Well, that's the thing. The math is exactly what has everyone from Wall Street to local housing advocates so agitated. It's the missing piece of the puzzle.
What do you mean?
The governments have released the policy, but they've withheld the mechanics. They haven't released the purchase price they plan to pay developers for these units.
Wait, really?
Really. They haven't released the metric they'll use to define affordable once they own them, and they haven't explained the structure of these innovative financing tools.
So we are essentially being handed a receipt with the total blacked out.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But the financial analysts in our sources have been running the projections, and the numbers are just staggering.
Tell me.
Mark Goodman, a commercial real estate principal in Vancouver, broke down the inventory. If the government is buying 2,200 units, and the average asking price for those units is around $800,000 to $1.1 million.
Which is standard for Vancouver.
Right. Then this buyout could cost taxpayers anywhere from $1.76 billion to $2.5 billion.
Oh, my gosh.
And that's just the acquisition cost. That doesn't include the legal fees, the maintenance, or the cost of actually running them as subsidized housing.
So the government is stepping in to clear inventory that the private market is just refusing to touch.
Exactly. Buyers are looking at these condos, looking at the developers' asking prices, and just walking away.
Which brings us to a massive question about how the real estate market actually functions. I mean, if you are a developer with an empty building and nobody is buying your condos at $1 million, why not just put them on sale?
Right, like normal retail.
Yeah. Why not drop the price to $700,000 to clear the inventory, like a car dealership clearing out last year's models? Because if we look at the stalled market right now, there are 4,376 completed but unabsorbed condos in Metro Vancouver alone.
And that's a 76% jump from the previous year.
76%.
It's a severe market freeze. And the reason developers don't just hold a fire sale comes down to the mechanics of commercial lending.
How so?
Developers build these towers using syndicated loans from major banks. And those loan agreements have very strict covenants tied to the projected sale price of the units.
Okay, so they promise the bank they'll sell them for $1 million.
Exactly. So if a developer suddenly drops the price of 10 condos by 30% just to get some cash flow, the bank revalues the entire building based on that new lower price.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Right. So suddenly, the developer's collateral collapses, they breach their loan covenants, and the bank can call the entire loan in, which pushes the developer into immediate bankruptcy.
Wow.
They literally cannot afford to drop their prices. They are trapped in this staring contest with the market.
And now the government just blinked.
Exactly. And this is where the financial experts in our sources are just unleashing on the plan.
Yeah, I saw Mark Cohodes mentioned in the sources.
Yes. Mark Cohodes, the famous short seller who made his fortune betting against the U.S. subprime mortgage collapse in 2008. He's calling this intervention a moral hazard on steroids.
Moral hazard on steroids, that's a strong phrase.
It is. And he makes a very sharp historical comparison to how the United States handled their housing crash. In 2008, the U.S. government let housing prices fall. Everything went down 40 to 50%.
Right, they let the market clear organically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, millions of people took massive losses and builders went bankrupt. But the pricing reset to reality. Only after that carnage did the government step in to recapitalize the banks.
But Canada is doing the opposite.
Right. Cohodes argues that Canada is trying to skip the pain. They're refusing to let the prices clear and stepping in to prop up the valuations before the developers and the leveraged players have to take their medicine.
That concept of moral hazard is crucial for you to understand, listener, because it's not just some academic term. It means that when individuals or corporations take massive, reckless risks to enrich themselves, they do it knowing that if things go wrong, the downside is going to be subsidized by someone else.
In this case, you, the taxpayer.
Exactly. Cohodes argues that if you reward the people who built at unsustainable prices, you are teaching the next generation of developers that they can gamble as recklessly as they want.
And, this economic critique has immediately turned into a political firestorm.
Oh, for sure.
Looking at the arguments from the opposition, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre argues that this plan, quote, privatizes profits and socializes losses.
Meaning it shifts the financial burden of bad business decisions from the developers and the bankers straight onto the public ledger.
Exactly. And provincially, BC conservative housing critic Linda Hepner builds on that. She points out the destruction of market incentives.
Right.
If you're a developer and you know there's a standing government policy to eventually absorb your vacant units at a favorable price, you will never have any incentive to lower your prices to meet what local working-class buyers can actually afford.
It creates an artificial floor under the entire housing market. Prices can go up, but the government essentially guarantees they'll never be allowed to go down.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
And look, if you are listening to this right now, dealing with an 8% mortgage renewal, or if you've been entirely priced out of your hometown, hearing that the government might spend billions to buy a developer's mistakes probably makes your blood boil.
I mean, how could it not?
Right. Because our sources highlight a really heartbreaking, contrasting reality happening right now. Everyday citizens are facing a wave of foreclosures.
Yeah.
In the Kelowna region, the unemployment rate has hit 9%. If you look at court-ordered home sales in Metro Vancouver, where the bank literally forces the sale of a home, they jumped from 28 in October 2023 to 119 in October 2025.
Wow.
So what does this all mean for the regular homeowner? They can't afford their mortgage renewal, they can't sell without taking a massive loss, and there's no bailout for them. Isn't there a glaring double standard here?
It is an undeniable, glaring double standard. A regular family who loses their job and can't afford their mortgage doesn't get a taxpayer buyout.
No.
They are subject to the ruthless reality of the free market. But when a massive corporate developer faces a default because they misread the market, the state intervenes to absorb the product.
It raises a fundamental question about who capitalism actually applies to in this country.
It really does.
And politically, it's a nightmare. The optics are terrible. You let the homeowner drown, but send a multi-billion-dollar yacht to rescue the developer. So why would the government eagerly walk into that PR disaster?
Right.
They must be terrified of something much bigger than a few bankrupt development companies.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, to find out what that is, you have to look past the developers and look at whose money is actually evaporating.
Okay, who?
Macroeconomic analyst Ben Rabideau offers a really compelling theory in our sources. He suggests this might not actually be about saving the developers at all. It might be a stealth operation to save the Canadian banking system.
Wait, I'm trying to connect the dots here. If a builder goes under, the bank seizes a half-empty tower. Are you saying the government is buying these condos just so the developers have enough cash to pay back the major banks?
Look at the data Rabideau highlights. According to the Bank of Canada, major banks lending to builders skyrocketed from roughly $20 billion in 2020 to over $75 billion in 2025.
$75 billion.
Yes. To put that in perspective, that is a colossal percentage of domestic commercial lending. It's a massive, concentrated exposure to one single sector.
Let's follow that mechanism. If these developers start defaulting en masse, the banks are suddenly holding billions of dollars in real estate that is worth far less than the loans they issued.
Exactly.
And the federal banking regulator, OSFI, requires banks to hold capital in reserve against bad loans, right?
Right.
So if $75 billion in builder loans starts going bad, banks have to massively write down their assets. And when banks take massive losses, they tighten up lending for everyone.
Yep.
Suddenly, regular businesses can't get operating loans, you can't get a car loan, and the entire broader economy just freezes.
And that is the systemic risk Rabideau is pointing to. The theory is that the government is trying to cauterize the wound in the housing market before the infection reaches the balance sheets of the major banks.
Wow. And this macroeconomic maneuvering is happening against a backdrop of intense and frankly ugly political and historical context.
Oh, yeah.
Our sources highlight some very specific criticisms regarding who allowed this bubble to inflate in the first place. The federal housing minister right now is Gregor Robertson.
Right.
He was the mayor of Vancouver during the exact years that housing prices in the city doubled. Critics are quick to point out the irony that the figures who presided over the inflation of the bubble are now the ones writing the public checks to manage its deflation.
And Mark Cody's goes even further. He offers a scathing critique of the broader regulatory environment that created this mess. He actually refers to Canada as Arctic Mexico.
Arctic Mexico, that is quite the label. Walk us through the mechanics of what he actually means by that, because he obviously isn't just talking about the weather.
No, definitely not. Kodos is arguing that Canada has functioned as a haven for laundered capital and underground banking flows.
Okay.
The mechanism basically works like this. Vast sums of foreign capital flow into the country, often bypassing traditional scrutiny, and they park themselves in Vancouver and Toronto real estate.
Right.
This hot money buys up pre-sale condos, effectively washing the cash while creating a massive artificial surge in demand. Developers see this demand and just keep building luxury towers, assuming the well will never run dry.
And the regulators.
Cohos argues that government regulators willfully ignored this intersection of illicit capital and real estate for years because it artificially propped up the ecosystem and generated massive tax revenues.
But now interest rates are up, global capital flows have shifted, the hot money has dried up, and the tide has gone out.
Exactly.
The developers are left holding thousands of luxury condos that the actual domestic, local wage-earning population fundamentally cannot afford. And pulling the plug on that ecosystem threatens to collapse the whole house of cards.
It does.
So is it possible the government isn't rescuing developers out of favoritism, but because they are terrified of the ripple effect a collapse would have on the entire Canadian banking system?
When a sector becomes too big to fail, governments often feel forced to step in. It isn't necessarily a desire to reward bad behavior. It's a calculation that the collateral damage to the everyday economy, including the stability of everyone's bank deposits and pension funds, is simply too catastrophic to allow.
Okay, I understand the fear of systemic collapse. But the optics of a taxpayer bailout are still terrible. We've heard all the criticisms. We've heard about the moral hazard, the double standard for homeowners, the underground banking risks.
Yeah, it's a lot of negatives.
Let's pivot and look for a silver lining. Is there any scenario detailed in our sources where this plan actually works out for the taxpayer? Like, is there a version of this where the public actually gets a genuinely good deal on affordable housing?
There is a path to success, but it's incredibly narrow. We have to look at the perspective of Sir Somerville, a real estate finance professor at the University of British Columbia.
Okay, what does he say?
He says this plan could be either really dumb or it could be incredibly cost-effective. The entire outcome relies on execution.
So what is the mechanism for making it cost-effective?
Somerville says the government needs to act like a vulture fund.
A vulture fund?
Yeah. In the financial world, a vulture fund waits for a company to become distressed and then swoops in to buy their assets at rock-bottom prices. He argues that the government should not be paying retail prices for these condos. Instead, they should use a reverse auction.
A reverse auction.
Yeah.
So instead of buyers bidding the price up, the sellers have to bid the price down to win the government's money.
Exactly.
If a developer is stuck with a unit they listed at $900,000 and they are bleeding cash, the government steps in and says, we have $1 billion to spend. Who is willing to take the biggest haircut? We will take that unit off your hands, but we are only giving you $450,000.
Yes. They demand a 50% discount. And Somerville runs the math on this scenario. If the government buys a unit at a massive discount, their carrying costs are incredibly low. They can rent that unit out at rates that actual working people can afford. And with just a 1% to 1.5% annual appreciation in the property value, the government would break even over the long term.
Oh, wow.
It becomes a self-sustaining pool of affordable housing.
Hold on. You're telling me Mark Carney and the federal government are going to play hardball like a Wall Street shark?
Well, that's the big question.
That seems highly unlikely given the cozy history between governments and developers we just talked about. I mean, Somerville himself notes in the sources that for this reverse auction to work, it requires, quote, more Goldman Sachs Mark Carney than Laurentian elite Mark Carney.
Right.
The government has to be willing to squeeze the developers, let them lose all their equity, and only pay the absolute base construction cost of the building.
And that tension is exactly what makes the coming months so critical. Will the government act as a ruthless steward of taxpayer money, or a generous benefactor to distressed builders.
But there's a massive twist in the sources that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh,
You would assume the developers were the ones in the back rooms begging the government for this exact buyout program.
actually.
But according to the Urban Development Institute, or UDI, which represents the major developers, they didn't even ask for this.
It is the great irony of this entire $5 billion announcement. Mike Drummond, the CEO of UDI, went on the record stating that the industry did not advocate for a government condo conversion program.
I find that fascinating. If they didn't want the government to buy their condos, what did they actually want?
They wanted a demand-side stimulus. Specifically, Drummond notes they wanted an expansion of the GST rebate for all new homebuyers.
Like what Ontario did.
Exactly. Similar to a policy recently implemented in Ontario.
Let's break down the difference between those two approaches. A GST rebate means the government cuts the sales tax on new homes. It puts money directly into the pockets of everyday buyers.
Right. By lowering the tax burden, you make the home slightly more affordable for retail buyers. The industry's argument is that this naturally stimulates demand, it clears the inventory organically through normal market transactions, and it gives builders the cash flow and confidence to start new projects.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like a drowning swimmer asking you to throw them a life preserver so they can swim to shore, and instead you just buy the entire swimming pool.
Yeah, it's spot on.
The industry just wanted a tax cut for buyers to restart the engine of the market. But the government chose instead to become the biggest single buyer in the market.
Which loops us right back to the concerns about market distortion. If you offer a GST rebate, the free market still dictates which condos sell and which ones don't. Buyers choose based on location, build quality, consumer preference.
Good projects sell, bad projects fail.
Exactly. But if the government bulk buys thousands of units directly from the builders, they're artificially picking winners and shielding specific developers from market forces entirely.
And they are doing it with billions of taxpayer dollars, while the actual pricing, the definition of affordable, and the structural mechanics remain entirely under wraps.
Which guarantees the debate is only going to get louder. You have a massive economic intervention that developers claim they didn't ask for.
Right.
That housing advocates are deeply skeptical of because they fear overpaying, and that financial experts are warning could permanently warp the risk calculations of Canadian builders.
So let's bring this all together. We have taken a deep dive into a breathtakingly large $5 billion attempt to unfreeze a completely stalled housing market in British Columbia.
It's massive.
We have explored how a seemingly straightforward infrastructure bill contains a highly explosive plan to absorb up to 2,200 vacant luxury condos.
Yep, we unpack the mechanics of the market freeze, looking at how commercial loan covenants trap developers into holding empty inventory.
We examine the fierce debate over moral hazard and the danger of teaching the market that profits are private but losses are public.
And we broke down a theory that this is actually a stealth rescue of the Canadian banking sector to protect their $75 billion exposure.
Plus, we looked at the narrow, ruthless vulture fund path the government would have to walk to make this an actual win for the taxpayer.
It is just a profound debate over the role of government, the mechanics of housing finance, and who ultimately bears the risk in a capitalist society.
When the free market freezes, what is the price of thawing it out, and whose credit card is used to pay the bill?
It is the defining economic question for cities dealing with affordability crises globally.
Which brings us back to that massive risky bet we talked about at the very beginning of the show. If you build a business, take massive risks, and the government catches you when you fall, what do you do next?
Right.
We want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you look around your own city. If the government establishes a precedent of absorbing unsold inventory when the market turns sour, how will that change the behavior of the next generation of builders?
That's the real question.
Will it encourage a golden age of rapid, fearless construction to solve the housing crisis? Or will it incentivize developers to build even more reckless, overpriced projects, knowing the taxpayer is waiting at the bottom with a safety net?
It is a question that will literally define the skyline for decades.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will catch you next time.